preparing to die.
Behold, the house of Usher. And that's about all the sounds you get out of this game. Still pretty sweet though. This is House of Usher by Crystalware, released for the Atari 8-bit line of home computers in 1980. It's ridiculously obscure, barely known even among collectors. The only reason I'd even heard of it was due to the sheer amount of release lists I'd been exhaustively poring over in preparation for Dead Pixels, but this reclusive little RPG may well lay claim to being the world's first survival horror game. And that's a strange name for a subgenre while we're on the subject, isn't it? Aren't most games about survival? In fact, if you really think about it, a good number of those early arcade titles are pretty bloody horrific. Take Space Invaders. There's no end level to Space Invaders. There's no victory condition. They just keep coming. Earth is doomed. You're witnessing the end of days. Every man, woman and child on the planet is about to die a hideous fiery death because try as you might, you're just not good enough to save them. In Centipede, you're an elf called Ollie whose forest friends have been turned against him by an evil wizard. That wizard's not in the game. There's no revenge on the cards here, no hope of reversing the spell. You're just left to blow your former pals to pieces with death magic until they eventually tear you apart. What the fuck, Atari? But the name is what it is, and its key characteristic is usually a massive de-emphasis on direct combat in favour of fleeing or hiding from enemies in a horror-themed environment. And this might be achieved by making your adversaries invincible or overwhelmingly powerful, under-equipping you with piece-of-shit weapons, or making ammo incredibly scarce. You remember how Silent Hill made Harry Mason a crappy shot on account of him never having held a gun before? Well, whoever you're steering around House of Usher has never even heard of a fucking crossbow, let alone held one. He thinks it's an advanced hair decorating technique used to create a double helix beehive. You can barely hit the wall with this goddamn thing, let alone the colourful cast of horrific enemies that includes mummies, werewolves, tarantulas and maniacs lying in wait for you. And even if by some intervention of the angels you manage to pop an arrow in one of them, it takes such a pitiful amount of health away that you may as well be trying to flog them to death with your damn socks. You move from room to room collecting various antiques and treasures as in many early RPGs, but here in the House of Usher, you've got bigger problems to worry about than how many silver tea sets you can run out the back door with. Your stamina meter is forever plunging downwards like you've just taken a shortcut through a nest of cobras, and it's down to you to survive for as long as you can by unearthing healing items and meagre scraps of armour to prevent you from being murdered outright by monsters. Look, that's a goddamn slug! It's dancing around me like Muhammad fucking Ali. Good lord. It's a bad game even by the standards of 1980. It's clumsy to control, has hideous inventory management, and some screens like the secret passages take so long to load that they could name their own era. But there it is. House of Usher, the world's first survival horror game. Congratulations, you now know more on the subject than any article I've ever read. But then who can blame them? You know, most sources on the matter will offer Atari's Haunted House up as the originator of the genre, and that's probably because it isn't hiding away on a forgotten reference list on the arse end of the internet. See, the origins of arcade games or home console titles are a breeze to track down. They were and still are massively popular and collectible. They made explosive marks on history. Millions of people owned, played and knew of them in their homes, their bars or their local funhouses. Did you know Chuck E. Cheese's was founded by Atari's head man Nolan Bushnell as a way of further expanding the reach of his company's gaming empire? Coin-op arcade machines were descending on every viable location that could house them like a goddamn bedbug infestation. Even if you hadn't played a new title, you were sure to have at least heard of it by way of the sheer floor space they took up. But PC gaming and its humble beginnings, well, that's a murkier beast entirely. Its own cradle of life is spread across numerous American private research universities, and the students that made use of their monstrous mainframe computers, refined from early Cold War military equipment such as the Whirlwind, developed for the US Navy by the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. It was here at MIT in 1962 that 3 students programmed the strategic combat simulator Space War on the PDP-1 minicomputer, a statistical calculator that also acted as the development base for the world's first text editor, word processor, interactive debugger, and some of the earliest known computerized music. Although Space War would directly inspire the first coin-operated arcade games, Galaxy Game and Computer Space, gaming on home computers was a notably more guerrilla-style operation than we know it today. See, much like the PDP-1, early PCs were never really designed with gaming in mind. The original commercial vision for home computing was centered around creating a futuristic electronic database capable of holding your mother's cooking recipes, your dad's finances, your kids' encyclopedias and schoolwork, as well as brewing your morning coffee and ordering robots to take out your garbage. Obviously, this never happened for reasons related to both underwhelming technology and the sheer cost of these monsters. It was only really in the late 70s that arcade companies like Exidy and Bally attempted to push graphically powerful PCs into the market to capitalise on the inflating arcade market, but even these were far more popular with hobbyist and homebrew groups than anyone else. In fact, PC gaming back in those early days was almost exclusively hobbyist and homebrew. Games were largely distributed via special interest magazines, and even then they required you to actually program the damn things in yourself. Half the time, if you didn't want to fork over a shit ton of money, you'd also have to buy the computers in kit form and solder them together yourself too. But then I guess that hasn't really changed much in 4 decades, has it? No, the earliest commercially available games on these early platforms, the most successful of which were the Commodore PET, the Apple II, and the dirt cheap TRS-80, weren't flashy arcade ports or even unflashy arcade ports. Aside from a handful of card games and chess simulators, the first PC game libraries were chock full of interactive fiction or text adventures. They were, as the name suggests, mostly text-based, although illustrative accompaniments to the story began showing up as early as 1980, and required the player to progress by entering simple commands to explore and solve puzzles. A large part of the challenge was figuring out what commands you could actually use, and back then that was a pretty exclusive club. Here I am playing Haunted Mansion for the Commodore 64, and I've just encountered the spirit of the deceased homeowner, Hubie Marston. See how the game rejects my attempts to mock the ghost, or grab my crotch, or kiss the ghost, or punch the ghost, or take my pants off. Good lord, where are we? North Korea? What can I do? Although many of these games had already been written for the aforementioned university mainframe computers, the first text adventure available for commercial distribution was Scott Adams' Adventureland, released in 1978. Adams would go on to release perhaps the first truly horror-based interactive fiction game with 1979's The Count, in which you're dispatched to destroy Dracula by the local terrified villagers. Now, I'm going to break the fourth wall for a moment here to state a couple of decisions I took quite early on with the Dead Pixels series. There are hundreds, and I mean hundreds, of horror-themed interactive fiction titles that populated the 70s and the 80s alone. They're still being written today. Ghost Town, Curse of Crowley Manor, Drac is Back, Lucifer's Realm, Jack the Ripper, Asylum, The Institute, Frankenstein Adventure, Transylvania, Glamis Castle, The Phantom's Revenge, Death Maze 5000, Bedlam, Grave Robbers, Voodoo Castle. I mean, we've seriously barely entered the 80s by this point. The sheer amount of these bloody things is worth its own dedicated retrospective alone, so to avoid bogging this series down in what I'm aware is quite a niche subgenre, I'd like to invite you to watch Dead Pixel's sister show, Death Letters, debuting soon, in which we'll be playing through these games in much more depth. In fact, that's actually it for these introductory episodes of Dead Pixels. From here on out, the games start to get a little more involved, so we'll be looking at them title by title from start to finish. Now don't worry, there'll still be all the history and trivia you could ever dream of packed into each and every installment. But with the sheer number of games produced after 1980, each episode will be about 4 hours long and confusing as fuck to follow. Trust me, lovelies, and join me again for episode 4, in which we'll be playing through the world's first vampire-themed arcade game, 1979's Dracula Hunter.